Ruben Amorim has been sacked as manager of Manchester United, or rather the head coach of Manchester United, a job title and role that he did not want, as he explained in that spectacular rant after the game against Leeds United, where he basically said, go on then, sack me. And he's got what he's wanted for, I think, a few weeks now. This has felt inevitable. The tension between Amorim and Wilcox has been building. And I think when that happens, the only thing that will happen is the manager leaving. I think the question isn't, is he going? The question is he going to get sacked or is he going to walk? And that press conference was a man that basically said, I've had enough, pay me off, sack me, I want out. And I think he has been a terrible appointment for Manchester United. A win rate of something about 33% or something is pathetic for the manager of Manchester United. However, it is possible that he didn't do good enough, but also the board of Man United continue to fail. They failed before Ruben Amorim. They failed during Ruben Amorim. And ask yourself this question: are you confident they will get the appointment right? Are you confident that things will change at Manchester United post-Amorim? And if the answer to at least one of those is no, then you also think the board of Manchester United is failing. You're allowed to think that the board are at fault and Ruben Amorim didn't do good enough. And that's exactly what I think. They got it all wrong with Ten Hag. They backed him. They spent loads of money on Ten Hag. After the final, they had a big decision to make. And their decision was to replace him. They wanted to replace Ten Hag. They just didn't know who, they just didn't know how, and they couldn't agree on these things. Dan Ashworth was saying you can't get Ruben Amorim. The profile of the squad does not fit the way that Ruben Amorim plays football. So they decided to stick with Ten Hag. And it wasn't because they believed in Ten Hag or they thought Ten Hag was a good manager and he was the future of Manchester United. It was because they just couldn't agree on the alternative. Then eventually they sacked Ten Hag. 4 months later, go get Ruben Amorim after sacking Dan Ashworth. He had to leave the club as well because his vision, because he couldn't agree with the board of Manchester United. He couldn't agree that Ruben Amorim was a good fit for Man U. So let's get rid of him and then we'll bring in Ruben Amorim anyway. The guy who has a big reputation in football, who's well regarded in football, we'll ignore him. We'll ignore him and we'll back ourselves. We know more than Dan Ashworth. Get him out of the club and let's get Ruben Amorim in. Then when he arrived, he discovered very, very quickly, the squad doesn't really match up with what Ruben Amorim wants to do. That, let's just call it 3-4-3 for the sake of the video, shall we? The 3-4-3 that Amorim wishes to play. We don't have the players capable of doing that. We don't have the profile of players required to do that. So let's start spending even more money trying to fix the mistake we just made in the summer because we didn't listen to the guy that actually has pedigree in this game of football. And since then, 14 months Amorim's been in charge, Man United have been a bit of a laughingstock. That's the reality of it. They've lost the fear. They've lost the fear long, long ago. They've gone from manager to manager to manager. And now and again, they hire a manager like Mourinho. You think, he's a good manager. But when someone like Mourinho fails at that club, I think that tells you everything you need to know. The issue is the football club. Because Mourinho is a world-class manager, and I appreciate he's maybe not the manager he once was at Chelsea, but he's still a top manager who knows how to run things, how to do things in football. And when he's falling out with you, if he's telling you you're doing things wrong, I would suggest you should probably listen. But they didn't. They knew best, and they continue. They backed Ruben Amorim. They spent big money on the likes of Ugarte and Xerxes and Højlund. It's not worked out whatsoever for a lot of the players, but also Ruben Amorim in particular. But speaking of him and his time at Man U, one thing that's been critical of Man United from former players of Manchester United, which is their lacking identity. They go get a manager with the most blatant and stubborn identity in the world in terms of the play style, his 3-4-3, and he wouldn't budge from that. Now, ironically, he has in the last few games, and there was a bit of an improvement as well after doing it too. But for the time being, for most of his reign, he would not move from that 3-4-3. He was playing that way, and he was playing that way. There was square pegs in round holes, and he didn't care. He continued doing it. This is my way of playing. And the message was quite clear. Bring in players that suit the way I play, and that's that. I'm not changing from the way I play. I believe and the way I play. And it felt like Man U, the board of Manchester United, ignored that and said, yeah, but we'll get you these players anyway, and you can just make it work, can't you? We'll go get you some of the players that you want, but not all the players that you need. Hopefully you can make it work. Shot caller, it didn't. They continued to fail on the pitch. There was nearly a smidgen of papering over the cracks, like we've seen with previous managers at Manchester United, like with Ten Hag. They nearly won the Europa League. They got to the final after finishing 16th in the Premier League and lost to one of the worst Spurs teams we've seen in quite some time. It was a really bad Europa League final between those two teams. It was two teams that were in need of direction, underperforming managers, and it was a case of who can win. It's a fantastic trophy. Winning the Europa League is a brilliant thing, but for two clubs trying to get Champions League football, maybe not. But Manchester United are used to winning Premier League titles, competing to win the Champions League, not to win the Europa League. And they didn't even win that. That was the failure. That's the magnitude of the failure of Ruben Amorim's time at Old Trafford. He had to go. It was inevitable. They're sitting sixth in the league, in the Premier League right now, which I don't think is bad. If you said to me at the start of the season, Man U will finish sixth, I would say that's an alright season for them, actually. Outside chance of Champions League football. Not the end of the world. Because that's where I see Man U now as a club right now. A team that might get Europa League football. On a really good season, and if another couple of clubs have a bad season, they might get Champions League football. But if they can finish 6 or 7, I would consider that a success for Man U today. And I appreciate if any Man U fans are listening, they're probably getting angry and they're getting offended with me right now. But that's the reality of it. You're no longer the club that can win the Premier League title. You may get there in future, but you're going to require big changes. And it's not just sacking Amorim. That's a change. But it feels like a small one. It feels like the problems at Old Trafford are much, much bigger than just who's in charge. Because the person in charge is just the face of the football club and it's the face of a failing football club but don't really know what they're doing. They've had changes in the boardroom. Ratcliffe going in as well gave them a bit of hope. But the problem still remains. The issues still continue despite there being change in the boardroom. Ashworth left, Wilcox has gone in, same problems persist, same problems continue. And it's hard not to look at the boardroom at Old Trafford and think you don't know what you're doing. And what you are doing simply isn't good enough. Now, Man U won't be an easy club to manage and an easy club to run. They are one of the biggest clubs in the world. Fact. Opinion as well. They're still one of the biggest clubs in the world. And even though I think on the pitch, success is limited at the minute because of how poor they are, off the pitch, they continue to be one of the biggest clubs in the world. So the challenge to get them back up to the top of the Premier League is not easy, especially when you consider how good the likes of Man City and Arsenal are this season, how good Liverpool have been in previous seasons. But actually, Liverpool is a perfect example of what Ruben Amorim could have and maybe should have tried to achieve. Perhaps he was. This whole, I'm not a head coach, I want to be the manager. So he wants to have his fingers in all the pies. He almost wants to do what Sir Alex did at Old Trafford. But I think you've got to earn that. It's not to say you can't do it or you won't be allowed to do it. But I think initially you can't. You go in there as head coach, but you prove yourself and you earn the trust. And once you do that, that's when you might get more responsibility. You might get a bigger say. You might get more power in the corridors at Old Trafford. Because Liverpool under Jurgen Klopp is a really good example. He went in there and he had to earn the trust of FSG. And once he'd done that, that's when Edwards started getting pushed out a little bit and Klopp became more and more powerful at Liverpool. But he had to earn that right. He had to prove what he could do on the football pitch. Amorim has never done that. He's sitting there saying, I'm not a head coach, I'm a manager. But there's nothing to suggest that you should be the manager at Manchester United. All the evidence suggests you shouldn't even be the head coach of Manchester United. He has been a failure. Now, when he arrived, I thought they were getting what was, and I still think this is true, by the way, at the time, they were getting one of what was considered to be the best young head coaches in European football. And I think that's true. I think that's what they hired. He was doing great work in Portugal. That's who they hired. Someone that was at the top of his game that a lot of European clubs were looking at. He was deemed to have a big future in the game. And do you know what? He might go on to have a big future in the game elsewhere post Man U. But that's who Man U were hiring. And then they had a decision. What are you going to do about it? Are you going to go all in? Are you going to back him? And it never felt like they ever did. It felt like they went in a bit, but not enough. Enough to say we support you, but not enough to say it's yours. The team's yours, the club's yours. What do you need? We're going to go get it for you. It felt like they did half a job. And that is something that's been a recurring theme at Old Trafford since Alex Ferguson left. Because he was the manager. He was the boss at Manchester United. And he earned that. He deserved that. Post then, there's not been someone that's gone in there and said, this club is mine. This team is mine. I'm going to turn the fortunes of Old Trafford around. They're incapable. And a big part of the reason they're incapable is because of their bosses. Was Amorim set up to fail to some extent? I think he was more set up to not succeed rather than to fail, if that makes any sense. Makes sense in my head. Hopefully it makes sense when you listen to it. But he's just another manager that's failed at Manchester United. And I think this period, while it will reflect on him, I think it reflects on the running of the football club more than it does Ruben Amorim. I don't think he was a good head coach there. I think he was pretty terrible, actually. There was a lot of games I watched of Man U. I thought, this guy's got no idea. They were crap. Man U were crap. It wasn't just that the fear's gone for Man U. That's been gone since Fergie. It's Ruben Amorim's team. You don't fear them when you play them because they're not very good. He's not very good. In game, what he could do, or what he didn't do rather, in game, was shocking. Often he would just switch like for like. They'd be needing to win a game of football. Sometimes you see them against 10 men and he's swapping a centre-back for a centre-back. Rather than going to a back four and trying to get an extra attacker on and trying to win the game, he would continue doing. He believed in what he was doing so much. He was completely blinded by any alternative until the very end of his reign. That's when you started seeing slight changes. Dorgu right wing, 4-3-3. In some games recently, they've looked all right. When they played Aston Villa, when they lost Bruno Fernandes, they ended up losing that game. Yeah, they did. They ended up getting beat. But I was impressed by what I've seen from Man U and from Ruben Amorim's team. I thought, all right, I could see this. And if that was at the start of his reign, yes, you maybe would have a bit more belief in him going on to be a success. But whenever you watched Man U under Ruben Amorim and they were good, you didn't think, oh, they've sorted it, they've turned a corner. You thought they've had a good game. Next week, it's not going to continue. He hasn't solved anything. It's just one good game, and that's it. And I think that's maybe the story of Ruben Amorim. Now and again, looked all right, but most of the time, they looked inadequate. He looked out of his depth. However, the big issues at Manchester United continue. The big issues at Manchester United, in my opinion, are not Ruben Amorim. He was just one part of the issue. He was just one problem. I'm not even sure they can solve that problem because that would require getting the next appointment right. I think there's an obvious answer at Selhurst Park, whose Glasner's contract is coming to an end. Lots of rumours he's not going to sign an extension with Crystal Palace. They may have to wait until the end of the season to get him because, again, he's a man that, I don't know, I get the feeling that he would want to see his contract out with Crystal Palace and has hopes of winning the Conference League with them as well and leaving on a high. And going to a higher profile job in a bigger club, and that would be Manchester United. Plus, plays 3-4-3, and while the profile of the squad isn't set up completely for Ruben Amorim, there's certainly some players in there that would maybe suit what Glasner's doing. I never felt they ever went all in on Ruben Amorim, though. I come the summer, I thought, what are you going to do if you go all in on this 3-4-3 formation? You're going to limit who you can get in to replace Amorim when it fails. Glasner felt like the real candidate for that. But I never felt they went all in on that. Even the big purchases, you look at Cunha, look at Mbomo, and you look at where they were previously. Wolves sometimes played a back three. Brentford, against the top six, they did. But apart from that, Thomas Frank played a 4-3-3 there. So even the big purchases weren't necessarily aligned to that formation. The next appointment's crucial. And I think if you would say to me, man, you will go on and finish sixth, I'd say that they've done all right in the second half of the season. And their ambition will be to get Champions League football, because fifth looks incredibly likely it will be Champions League football in the Premier League once again due to performance of the English teams in European football. So it's there. They can get it. They can get Champions League football. But they've got to get this appointment right. And I've just got no confidence that they will. No confidence whatsoever. Darren Fletcher's going in charge on an interim basis, and it feels a little bit like Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, which is, a crowd favourite here, have him. That cameo down for a little bit, but I don't think it will. I think it's gone too far for the Man U faithful, and it should be too far for the Man U faithful. They are a massive, massive club. They've got all the tools to be a good club, but they don't have the board to be a good club, and they didn't have the right head coach to be a good club either. Ruben Amorim sacked. It was inevitable. What else feels inevitable is that whoever they hire, I don't even know who they're going to hire next, whoever they hire to replace Ruben Amorim on a permanent basis, I think he's going to be set up to not succeed as well, because that's what they do at Man U. The problem is in the boardroom.